As far as I know, the mission is still classified. And I'm pretty sure that I could get into a whole lot of trouble by recounting the events of that night. Hell, I've heard about guys getting court-martialed for less. Back when I was doing basic out in San Diego, a story broke in the news about a naval officer who was rung up for sticking his dick in a subordinate's glass of chocolate milk. Chocolate milk. I mean, I love a tall glass of chocolate milk as much as the next guy, but is that really a reason to strip a man of his accomplishments? Of his dignity? Someone who's devoted his whole life to defending the rights and freedoms of his country. If you ask the Navy, it was. God help the serviceman who does anything to rock the boat. Well, I have a feeling that this little story of mine is going to do a whole hell of a lot of boat rocking. Thing is, I'm not in the US military anymore, so I don't really give a damn what Uncle Sam thinks. Besides, it seems like nowadays an ex-trigger puller who's seen his fair share of shit is cashing in on a book deal or getting some pretend tough guy Hollywood actor to play him in a movie. The difference between them and me is that I'm not doing this for the money or fame. I'm doing it because I feel like I have to, like I have an ethical obligation to keep the public informed. Part of me hopes that others will read this story and remember what my unit and I went through. If so, then maybe they'll be able to recognize the signs that I wasn't able to see. Maybe they'll be able to trust their gut enough to ask the right questions when things just don't add up. The other part of me thinks that I've gone completely insane for even entertaining the idea that inspired me to write this. Before I go too far, please understand, if you're expecting this to be some sort of moralistic tale about the horrors of war or a political statement about the United States' foreign policy, think again. I never was much for politics, and as far as I'm concerned, anyone who's gotten paid to kill, be it for country or otherwise, doesn't really deserve a seat at the table when discussing what's right and what's wrong with this world. Once my story is out, there won't be any hiding where it comes from. If the CIA wants to find me and lock my ass up in Gitmo, it won't be too hard, so I might as well lay all my cards out on the table. My name is Sergeant First Class James Willer. From 1996 to 2008, I was an active member of the military. For 7 of those years, I served as an elite Special Forces task commander for the U.S. Green Berets. As a member of the United States Army Special Forces, I've pretty much done it all. From providing protection to foreign diplomats in war-torn countries, to assisting the raid of South American drug compounds. It was the type of job that takes you all over the world. Before I turned 28, I had been to 4 different continents and visited over 24 countries. This particular story takes place in February of 2002, when my unit was called upon to take out what we were told was a suspected terrorist training complex nestled within the Afghanistan Hindu Kush Mountains. It was a different time. America had just invaded Afghanistan. Most of the world was still reeling from September 11th. The war's approval rating was through the roof, and the whole damn country was out for blood. My unit was no different. We were hungry. We wanted in on the action. It was personal for us soldiers back then. Maybe that's why we were so eager to jump into a fight, even though we knew there was something unusual about the job that we had been selected for. Even in briefing, the details surrounding the mission didn't smell right. A lot of us knew it too, but like I said before, we didn't care. Besides, I learned a long time ago that you don't get anywhere in the Army by asking questions. When your superiors order you to do something, you do it. What you don't do is poke and prod for additional information. They'll give you all the intel you need to know to get the job done, but not an ounce more. Compartmentalizing is what they call it. That's how the higher-ups like to operate things. Everyone's just a cog in the machine, working together to serve a higher purpose. We were told that the compound was located on the outskirts of a small, isolated village about 150 clicks due east of the Afghan-Pakistan border. Only about 100 people, mostly impoverished villagers, lived in the area surrounded by the training center. Twice a month, a group of Islamic extremists believed to be associated with the Haqqani network would drive a truckload full of food and rations to the locations and distribute it out. This was considered strange behavior because the villagers didn't appear to produce anything useful of note. Oftentimes, terrorist organizations offered assistance to groups of people who harvest and cultivate marijuana or poppies used for opium. And for just the price of a few goats, bread, cheap medical supplies. They could turn around and sell the crops for big money to help fund their outfit. However, in the case of this particular village, the people were never asked to give a thing, and still, the insurgents would show up with supplies. Just to be clear, these weren't benevolent militant radicals. They were known to be ruthless drug smugglers, and arms dealers, psychopaths hiding under the guise of religious revolutionaries. Intel had more than enough evidence linking them to some pretty horrific stuff, including the rape and pillage of a small village that was being extorted by a rival group. 32 men and boys executed, while the women, even the young girls, were sold to sex trafficking in Eastern Europe. To these people, human life held little value. They didn't just do things out of the goodness of their hearts. Even more peculiar than the relationship between the terrorist group and the villagers was the facility that we had been instructed to hit. It had been known about for some time, but satellite images suggested that it hadn't even been active since July of 2001, a few months before the 9/11 attack. All indications pointed to the place being completely deserted, yet we had been passed the incongruous orders to infiltrate and terminate any and all terrorist threats residing inside the compound. Keep in mind, a drone strike could do the exact same thing, quicker and more efficiently too, but for some reason, Washington decided to send us. All of this left us a little baffled as to why exactly our number had been called. Even though we weren't used to getting the whole story, it seemed like we had been afforded even less information than usual. It was obvious to most of us that something was definitely up. A few of the boys even joked after the briefing that all the hush-hush surrounding the assignment might have meant that they were sending us in after Osama. Of course, if we really were being sent to scratch a big name off Uncle Sam's hit list, we probably would have been informed to keep an eye out for him. That's usually the protocol with high-profile targets, information even a cog could find use for. 2 Black Hawk helicopters airlifted 12 of us in the same night that we were briefed. The choppers touched down right in front of the facility, just long enough for us to put our boots on the ground before taking off again into the night sky. They weren't going far, though. I was told that they'd be available for air support if things got too heavy for us on the ground. Aside from the buzz of the helicopters fading off over the mountaintops, there wasn't a sound in the air that evening. We may have been flown in under the cover of night. But if someone really was in the compound, then it would have been impossible not to hear us coming from miles away. In the village, a few curious locals began stepping out of their huts to see what all the ruckus was about. As the commanding officer, I told my men to think of them as civvies and not to engage unless given orders to fire. I remember how uncharacteristically warm the weather was for February in Afghanistan. The heat and humidity felt artificial as we stood underneath the stars that night, as if it was being siphoned from another climate. I could feel the precipitation begin to collect on my forehead, as the abnormally muggy desert air swathed my unit, smothering us in its thick, sweltering arms. The compound wasn't massive, but right away I could tell it would take a while to do a proper sweep. From the drop-off point, the main building looked to be somewhere around 4,500 square feet, although it felt like a palace towering over the tiny, flimsy huts of the villagers. A 10-foot cement wall ran all the way around the perimeter of the large gray building, fortifying the facility and giving it the look of a penitentiary. Thinking back, I find it kind of amazing that they were able to get the materials they needed to erect the impressive structure all the way up into the mountains, considering there was only one windy dirt road that accessed the area. We proceeded with caution to the south end of the facility, where we found the gate chained shut and secured with a single padlock. The odd thing was, it was facing outwards towards us, as if whoever locked it did so from the outside. One quick snip from a pair of bolt cutters later, and we were through the gate, standing in the courtyard of the compound. We found no surprises behind the wall. It was laid out exactly how the photos had suggested in the briefing. There was a couple of latrines and an empty unlocked storage shed, but aside from that, little else. The building itself had no windows, making it impossible to get a glimpse of anyone who might have been waiting for us inside. I broke my unit up into 3 teams of 4, each one led by a different soldier fluent in Farsi, the main language spoken in Afghanistan. Sergeant Horowitz, my unit's warrant officer, was the most fluent, so I left him in command of the team at the entrance of the compound. The villagers appeared to be getting more curious, so I instructed Horowitz to warn them off if they got too close. The other two teams, one led by Sergeant Nichols, who was also fairly proficient in the regional dialect, and the other, led by myself, was tasked with breaching the facility using the doors located on the eastern and western ends of the building. Once inside, our mission was to clear the compound and make sure no potential terrorist threats were left alive. All three teams were to remain in radio contact at all times. Before we entered the facility, I made sure my entire team was alert and on our toes. Even though satellite images hadn't spotted anyone on the premises in 8 months, I wasn't about to let my unit get caught with our pants down around our ankles. There really was no way to describe the kind of adrenaline rush you feel when you know that at any point the place could erupt into a firefight. It's that sense of walking into the unknown, the idea that death could be waiting for you just around the corner that gets your blood pumping like nothing else. It's a sick combination of fear and excitement. I liken it to the sensation you get right before your roller coaster hits its first drop, but multiplied by 1,000. There was no firefight, though. No gunshots, no militant extremists, no nothing waiting for us on the first floor. The place was just empty and uninhabited, as our intel had suggested. No, not empty. That's not the right word. It was abandoned. As if whoever was there got up in the middle of whatever they were doing and left. Loaded guns were propped up against the wall, half-eaten moldy bowls of crud were sitting on the tables. There was even prayer mats laid out across the floor. From the looks of it, the place had been deserted for a long, long time. We rendezvoused with Nichols and his team after a quick sweep. I ordered them to look for any hidden doors or exits, while my team headed upstairs to the building's second level. We had just started our ascent up the stairs when I heard Horowitz, still out by the gates, chime in on his headset.
Sergeant Willard, the civvies have grown in numbers, sir. We got about 3 dozen of them out here right now.
How close are they?
They're about 100 meters away.
Sit tight, I said. Try not to get spooked. It's not every day a couple of choppers land in your backyard. They're probably wondering what the hell's going on. If they get closer, warn them back. Don't use force unless it's absolutely necessary.
Copy that.
I could definitely tell Horowitz was jumpy over the con. I don't blame him. I probably wouldn't have been all that comfortable either if I was tasked with staving off a couple mobs of restless villagers. He and the rest of his team were outnumbered 9-1 out there. Still, for whatever reason, I'd have gladly switched places with him. There was something rotten in the air, and it wasn't the developing situation outside that was tripping my alarm. Expertly trained marksmen carrying high-tech weaponry flanked me as we were starting to sweep the second floor of the compound, but still, I felt small. My nerves were working overtime. It had gotten hard for me to breathe, like a 1,000-pound weight was sitting on my chest. I had become aware of an appalling sense of dread pervading its way through my consciousness. Each room we entered seemed to have a sort of unnerving consistency to it. Discarded Qurans lying on the floor, half-drunk canteens of water, stockpiles of fully automatic weapons left unattended. It was as if everyone had simply gone poof and disappeared. I couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment we would stumble upon something truly horrifying, something unspeakable. It wasn't terrorists I was worried about. I think subconsciously I felt like something much worse than armed insurgents was waiting for us in the upstairs rooms.
Willie.
This is Nichols. Willie was Sergeant Nichols' nickname for me. He knew I found it annoying, but insisted on calling me that anyway, especially during missions where correcting him wasn't high on my priority list.
We found a door down here on the southeast end of the complex. Looks like it leads to a basement. Could be a tunnel down there. We're going to check it out.
Okay, let me know if you find something, I replied.
Will do.
We only had a couple more rooms to clear, and our sweep of the upstairs would be done. But I was still on edge. The ominous sense of dread that I had been feeling was growing stronger with each and every passing minute. A terrible notion floated through my mind, one that we were being funneled down a deep, dark hole, into the expecting jowls of some sort of carnivorous hellion. with a ravenous appetite waiting for its next meal. I've been on 100 missions and never felt as hopeless as I did advancing through the dark corridor towards the final room. It was different from the others. I could feel it, almost as if it had been the source of the dark aura that I had recognized the moment that we stepped into the facility. Its doors were noticeably bigger, easily twice the size of the ones in the room that we had cleared. I practically swallowed my tongue when I noticed the strange symbols and hieroglyphics carved into the paneling. I may not have been able to read Farsi, but I know the language when I see it. Like I said, my job has taken me all over the world. I've been immersed in dozens of different cultures, but those markings were unlike anything I've ever seen before, completely alien in nature. I reached for the handle, but stopped short when I heard Horowitz's voice crackle over the comm system once again.
Sergeant Willier, we have a situation. The villagers are armed. I repeat, the villagers are armed.
What? What do you mean? How many of them are armed?
All of them, sir. They're waving their guns around and hollering. Would you like us to engage?
Negative. Do not fire on those villagers. You have cover behind the walls, but the four of you don't have enough firepower to pick a fight with 30 armed and angry Afghans. I tried to radio Nichols and his team in order to send them over to the gate for support, but they weren't responding. I assumed they had probably lost signal when they went underground. Horowitz spoke again.
Sir, there's twice as many of them now. I'd say closer to 60.
And they're all armed?
Affirmative. I don't know how they got their hands on a stockpile like this, but if I had to guess, I'd say every able-bodied man and boy in the village is out here right now. Thing is, and I know this sounds nuts, but they don't seem aggressive.
What do you mean, they don't seem aggressive? I asked.
Well, it looks like they're trying to wave us over to them. Some of them got their hands in the air, and not a single one of them is pointing their weapons directly at us. They keep yelling and stuff, but it doesn't sound like threats.
Can you hear what they're saying, Horowitz?
Yeah,
He said.
but it don't make much sense, sir.
Well, what are they saying? I demanded. I was biting my bottom lip, praying our chances of getting out of this place didn't come down to a gunfight between us and 60 pissed-off Afghan villagers.
They're saying to get away from the building. That the weapon will kill us.
What? Are we dealing with an IED here? Is this place booby-trapped?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to tell because there's so many hollering and they're just so far away. They say that we need to leave and lock the gate, that we can't trust you anymore. They're saying that the building, it's damned and y'all are too.
It sounded like the kind of ridiculous heretic you always hear in that part of the world. The building is damned. They might as well have been telling us that our souls were destined to rot in hell, or that Allah will smite us for our sins. Still, for whatever reason, there was something about this compound that was making me feel anxious, and the villagers' warnings weren't helping to ease those sentiments. We only had one more room to clear, and then I could figure out how to deal with the situation outside. But working up the will to finish our sweep was getting increasingly difficult. I was actually looking forward to getting out there and facing off with the gun-toting villagers. That's how bad I wanted to leave this god-awful place. Alright, sit tight, I instructed Horowitz. We'll be out there as soon as we finish in here.
Roger, be careful, sir.
I looked back to the large door with strange markings carved into it. I can't speak for the rest of my team, but the sight of it sickened me. I pushed through my sudden irrational feelings of disgust and tried the handle. It was locked, of course. A couple of us put our shoulders to the door, but we couldn't get it to budge. The thing was solid as a rock. I racked my brain trying to figure out the best way to breach it. There was no way to predict what was behind the door. We had already found weapons in the complex, and if the room contained any sort of flammable materials, then a controlled explosion would be dangerous. The sound of Nichols' voice over the comm interrupted my train of thought.
Willie, I'm in here at the base of the stairs and ground level. I think we lost radio contact when we were down in the basement.
Then you didn't hear Horowitz, I replied. Looks like the situation outside is getting worse. Those villagers may not be friendlies.
I didn't hear gunshots. How bad is it?
He asked. Stable for now, but barely. I don't know how much longer we have until things get serious. You need to get your team out there while I finish up in here.
Copy that, but we can't leave until I show you what we found in the basement.
That was the last thing I needed to hear. If I spent any more time in that building, I felt like I was going to lose my mind.
I think
He continued.
we might have found out what happened to some of the terrorists that we were sent in here to take out. I got 6 corpses down here and 1 warm body.
There were 2 things that made themselves immediately present to me. First and foremost, Howowitz and the others were sitting ducks out there, without any backup or support, and we needed to get to them as soon as possible. Secondly, as bad as I wanted to get out of that building, I couldn't in good conscience leave until we had combed every last square inch of the place. And that meant checking out what Nichols was talking about. I made an executive decision and decided to save the room at the end of the hall for last. It was clear that it would take more manpower to get the thing open anyways, so we were about faced and headed back down the stairs where Nichols was waiting for us. "Find anything up there?" I said. "No bodies, but we're not done. We're going to need to head back once you show me the corpses. Where's the rest of your team?" "Waiting for us in the basement with a prisoner." "Prisoner?" Nichols glanced over his shoulder, directing my attention to the hidden door that they had found. "Yeah, there's some kind of holding cell down there. The only one alive is a guy who was locked up, but that's not all you need to see." We followed Nichols and Diaz down to the basement of the compound, where the other 2 members of their team were already waiting for us. To say the stench in that small, compact room was unpleasant would have been making an understatement. The smell of the decomposing bodies lining the cellar floor was overpowering. I could feel my stomach begin to toss and turn, but fought hard to suppress the queasy sensation. As the commanding officer, I knew how important it was to keep it together in front of the boys. If they see you off your game, they won't be able to trust you to make calls when their lives are on the line. With the 8 of us, the team I was leading and the one I had put Nichols in charge of, now sharing the space filled with corpses, it was beginning to feel cramped. I instructed 4 soldiers back to the gate in order to free up some elbow room and provided Howowitz with a little more support. It was now just Nichols, Diaz, Barker, a weapons sergeant who had been part of my original team, and myself. On the far end of the cellar was a heavy metal door that joined a much smaller connecting room. At the base of the door was a small window that allowed guards to pass things in and out of the jail cell, presumably food, water, and waste. Just like the gate, the door was fastened with a chain and a single padlock. I stepped over the bodies and slid open the small window and took a look inside the cell. Sitting on the floor was an Afghan male who appeared to be in his mid to late 30s. He was dressed in traditional garb of the people who resided in the area, and sported the typical chin-strap beard that was worn by many of his fellow countrymen. His body was rail thin, as if his muscles had wasted away, yet seemed unfazed by this. He was alert, upright, if anything, almost a little bored by our presence. All in all, there was nothing particularly off-putting about the way he looked, but for some reason watching him brought out that same terrible feeling of dread I had been experiencing upstairs. Nichols could tell I was curious about the prisoner. "I've been questioning him about what went down in here, but he's not talking. You can try yourself if you want." I turned my head back to Nichols. "What do you think went down here?" "Don't know. But whatever happened was weird as shit." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Open your eyes, Willie! Look at these bodies!" Nichols got down on one knee and extended a finger to the neck of one of the corpses. "This looks like an exit wound from a .22. Every single one of these corpses has the exact same hole in the front of the neck. Check yourself if you don't believe me. Naturally, at first I assumed this was some kind of execution, but look. He yanked so hard on the rotting stiff's head to lift it that I was surprised he didn't pull it off. No entry wound at the back of the neck. It's like the fucking bullet was fired from inside the guy's throat. My theory is that the bullet entered from the front of the neck, and Nichols is getting his panties riled up for nothing," Diaz stated from the corner of the room. "Yeah, it's not surprising an idiot like you would come up with a theory like that. See how the skin and muscles seem to stray outward? It's pretty clear that something came out of this hole, not in it. Even if it had entered here, don't you think that at least one of these guys would have an exit wound, Willie? It's curious, but we don't really have time to speculate right now. We weren't sent here to play CSI, and Howowitz needs the rest of us outside. Snap some photos, get the prisoner, and let's get out of here." "Grab the prisoner?" Nichols looked stunned. "What are we talking? P.O.W? Now? How can we be sure he's not one of the guys we're sent here to hit? And how can we be sure he's not a friendly? He was locked up when you got here, and we know someone put him in the cell. He certainly didn't lock himself away. Nichols shook his head. No. The guy's giving me a bad vibe, Willie. I don't really give a damn what kind of vibe he's giving you. We don't just kill people because they make us a little uncomfortable. To be honest, the prisoner was making me more than a little uncomfortable. There was something wholly unpleasant in the air, and I couldn't help but feel like it was radiating from that cell. I had made up my mind, though. That's bullshit! Nichols shoved a gloved finger to my chest. We had our orders. We're here to eliminate any potential terrorist threats in this facility. That guy feels like bad news, and you know it. Let's take him out and be done with it. Last I checked, we weren't told anything about bringing back POWs. I mean, think about it. How thick can your skull really be? These corpses on the floor have been dead for weeks, months, maybe. They should be nothing but bones by now. Why are they rotting so slowly? Plus, even if they did lock him up, how the hell is he not a corpse yet, too? Who's feeding him? Or cleaning up his shit, for that matter? Stand down, I fired back. Last I checked, I was Papa Sierra of this outfit. You got a problem with that? Fine. We can discuss it later. But we're getting the prisoner out of the basement right now. That's an order. Now get that lock cut. Diaz cut the lock using the same pair of bolt cutters that we used to get past the gate. He and Barker entered the cell, grabbed the prisoner firmly by each arm, and hoisted him to his feet. Standing between the two soldiers, he looked mind-numbingly skinny. I remember thinking how he wasn't just swimming in his baggy robes, he was drowning in them. I wondered if he'd even be able to walk. Nichols didn't protest as Diaz and Barker dragged him out of the cell and into the room, but he didn't have to. I could see the disapproving look in his eyes. The sudden sound of gunshots erupted upstairs, broke the tension between us. There was no need to bark orders. Everyone in the basement knew Horowitz and the rest of our unit needed as much support as they could get. I took point and led us up the stairs, followed closely behind by Nichols, while Diaz and Barker, still holding on to either arm of the prisoner, brought up the rear. By the time I reached the top, shots were still tearing through the once quiet mountain air. I was already starting out the door when I heard a crash behind me. I whirled around just in time to see Barker and Diaz fall to the floor as the prisoner sprinted up to the facility's second level. Somehow, the sickly-looking man was able to toss two green berets in their physical prime aside like they were children, and was making an escape, without missing a beat. Nichols took off up the stairs after him.